Yeah, exactly. My last record, Road to Forever, when I made that record, I decided I was going to play everything on every track. So I played all the guitar parts, electric guitar, acoustic guitar, pedal steel, mandolin, banjos, everything that had strings on it, I wound up playing. And by the time I had finished, I was very happy with what I had done, but I felt like I was just making this record alone. I think I had one person come in as a guest who was Steve Lukather, who came in and played guitar with me on one track. We had so much fun doing it. That was right at the end of the project. I decided that the next time I made a record, I was going to invite more friends. I had nothing that I had to prove that I could do this all myself, so I wanted to have a lot of fun doing it, and I wound up having a lot of guest celebrities on this new album, American Rock and Roll. And the idea was to have a song, which is the title song for the album, American Rock and Roll, that took me back to when I was at Woodstock. And I saw Jimi Hendrix and Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young and Santana and Janis Joplin, and to me, which was probably the biggest explosion in music history in rock and roll at one place at one time. It became a worldwide phenomenon that has yet to be recreated, in my opinion. So the influence that I felt from all of those acts that were there on me, and as I went through and had some success, and the influence I had on a lot of people later, decades later, I wanted to kind of encapsulate all that into a song, kind of the history of American rock and roll. And so as I started writing this song, I thought I should do it chronologically and then bring in artists throughout different decades that had been either influenced by me and my playing, or people that I knew and played with and that we had played together, and somehow our lives had crossed from Woodstock to today. So
That's an amazing idea.
Yeah, and it's a salute to all the people that have really boiled to the top, bubbled to the top in the music business on their own because of their art and their love of rock and roll. And so people are on this record like Mick Fleetwood from the 70s. He starts out American rock and roll with that old kind of 70s drum pocket. About halfway through, Chad Smith from the Chili Pepper comes in like a bull, just comes in playing so hard and so strong, and he just transforms this track into a different place as the decades go by. Slash, who lives down the street from me, came down and played on it. He was really excited that I'd asked him to come in and play on my record. And I couldn't figure out who was more excited, me to have him come in and him and I being playing solos off each other in the studio, in my studio. And we just had a ball, and I think it was about an hour and a half we sat there and came up with these guitar parts, and it was really fun and exciting and refreshing to me to have other artists and other influences come in to play with me on that particular record. As a matter of fact, on the whole album, there's a lot of guest artists that were a lot of fun and brought a lot of just feeling and ideas and their professional music ability onto the album.
That's amazing to hear. And so who are some of the other people who played? I mean, just on one track, that's a really interesting idea to kind of go through the development of rock and roll on a single song, and to still be creating stuff that's like fresh and original after all that you've done is brilliant. So yeah, I can't wait to hear the record and to write about it. But yes, talk me through some of the other people.
There's a lot of people that came in. I was writing this song. I wanted to write kind of a stadium anthem rock song that you would imagine 100,000 people in some stadium all jumping up and down singing this chorus together. So I came up with this idea of a song called Rock You. And Sammy Hagar and I have known each other since heavy metal days back in the 80s. We've done shows together, we've done charity benefits together, and so I wanted to do a duet with another male singer. So I called up Sammy and said, I've got this song that's like a rock anthem song. I'd love to have you sing a duet with me. He said, yeah, sure, come on up. So I jumped on a plane and flew up to San Francisco and up to Sausalito to his studio. And he was sitting there singing this. I sang a verse, he sang a verse, I sang a verse, he sang part of a chorus, I sang. We just traded off on it, and it fit perfectly. The difference in tone and character, and he's got that really gritty rock sound in his voice. It fit just beautifully. While we're doing that, Joe Satriani, who keeps his guitars in the back of Sammy's studio, comes walking down the hallway, and I go, Joe, go get a guitar. You got to play on this with me. So when we finished the vocals with Sammy, Joe and I sat there for about an hour and a half, writing these harmony parts, him doing a solo, me doing a solo, trading off, just having a really fun, exciting, just electrifying hour and a half of putting this together. While we were doing those guitar parts, Bob Weir from the Grateful Dead has a studio about 2 blocks away. And when he's bored and nothing's going on in his studio, he comes wandering into Sammy's to see what's going on and have a cup of coffee. I went, Bob, you have to sing on this track. So we put him out on the microphone. And I think everybody that played on that song and had anything to do with it or was around at the time wound up singing in this chorus. So there's probably 100 different voices that you hear, because I had the same person sing 2 or 3 different times. So the chorus sounds like there's probably 100 people singing on it, but it just kind of came together in a really natural, unplanned way, and turned out to be surprisingly exciting and energetic for me. And if I'm not excited about a record, it goes to magnetic heaven, where you hit erase and it goes away. So I was really excited about that. That's going to be the second single to come out, is Rock You. I think it's going to drop shortly in another week or so. So anyway, Satriani's on that, Sammy Hagar wrote this song. Peter Frampton and I had done a bunch of Frampton's Guitar Circus shows together, when I went and sat in with him on, I don't know, 15 or 20 different shows, and we played Hotel California together, the harmony parts on the end, and we did a Stevie Ray Vaughan show, a song in his show called Pride and Joy, where we trade off guitar solos, and just had a really fun time doing it. And then when that was over, I got a call from him saying, I'm being inducted into the Musicians Hall of Fame in Nashville, Tennessee. I need someone to come induct me. Would you do that? And I went, absolutely. So I was honored that he asked me to fly from LA to Nashville in the middle of February, which was really cold, and put together kind of his history of his career, and made a speech about him and his career and all of his major landmark things that he had done in his life, and then inducted him into the Musicians Hall of Fame. A year later, they invited me to be an inductee into the Musicians Hall of Fame, and they said, well, who would you like to have induct you? And I said, well, I think he owes me. So I called Peter up, and he came over. He was living in Nashville at the time, and inducted me into the Musicians Hall of Fame. So when I was hearing this one song, I kept thinking about the sound that Peter has when he plays this guitar through a Leslie. And I said, that sound is perfect for this one song. So I called him up. I said, hey, I got this track. Can I just pop into your studio for an hour or two? This is about a year ago. And would you just play guitar on this thing for me? So I flew to Nashville and brought my little hard drive under my arm and went into his studio, and we recorded Peter's performance on it, which is brilliant. It's beautiful. It's just the exact color that track needed. There's a lot of different players that came and went. There's a song called Little Latin Lover. There's like an acoustic nylon, basic kind of Spanish rhythm song. After doing the introduction to Hotel California on the nylon string guitar part for The Hell Freezes Over, I wanted to write and perform a guitar part that gave me a chance to use the nylon string guitar again and show off the skills that I developed in the Holiday Inn, playing nylon string guitar while people were eating their dinner and drinking their wine back in the early 70s. So I came up with that, and while I was thinking about these songs, I try to find people that I think are musically and feeling-wise the appropriate musicians for that piece of music. Like Peter was perfect for the way things have to be. And so I kept thinking about the bass part for this song, Little Latin Lover, and I remembered this guy named Abe Laboriel, who's a really wonderful, wonderful, amazing bass player, and his son's a brilliant drummer. So Abe and I used to work in the studio in Boston in the early 70s, like 69 or 70. And he came in, he was the first guy that ever did all that bass slapping stuff. And so I said, this is perfect for Abe. So I called him up. He came over to my studio, came in, and it was just the absolute right call. As soon as he started playing bass on that track, it was a marriage made in heaven. It was the right call for the right guy to play on that song. And so every song on the record has, like Steve Gadd came in and played on this one song called First Glimpse of the Sun. And I've worked with Steve here and there a couple of times. I've loved his feeling, loved his pocket, and I kept thinking, who would be right to play drums on this? The first part of it's got to be brushes, the second part of it's got to be sticks, and then it kind of swells into this big vocal performance as well. And Steve happened to be in town. I think he was working with either Paul Simon or somebody, and he was in town doing it, and he had a day off. So I said, "You're in town? Come on over. I got a gig for you." So he came over and sat down, 3 passes, did it, one with brushes, one with sticks, and then one a little more aggressive, and we just edited it together. It just turned out to be the perfect selection of the right energy from the right players. Jim Keltner plays drums on a couple of songs, and so the people that I chose, whether it was somebody to play like really aggressive rock and roll, like Slash or Sash, Joe Satriani, or somebody that had a little more sensitivity, like Gadd or Keltner, that had that pocket, I selected the players I thought would be the most appropriate for every song. And so it's not just a name-dropping record.
It happened organically by the sounds of things.
Yeah.
Because obviously you're going to have the contacts to do whatever.
Yeah.
So, but it does sound like, you got a song and then you support, who could play on this, or like with Peter, just sort of like these things happen by chance, or so that's a much more authentic way to make a record. So,
I thought so, yeah. Instead of trying to preconceive how everything should fit together, as I had an idea for the song and it started developing, I kept thinking, who would be the most appropriate people to play that with the right feel and the right energy for this? And so far, all the selections have turned out to work pretty well.
That's going to be great. And so after Road to Forever, so 7 years later, you're now coming out with American Rock and Roll. Already so soon, because like Airborne in the 80s, I guess you must feel slightly, pissed off with the lack of promo, because by all accounts it's a great record.
No, when I recorded Airborne, it was in the very early 80s, and I had been on the road working from the time I was about 15. And I was married, I had kids. I'd been gone probably the first 8 or 10 years of my 4 kids' lives. I decided to not go on the road, to stay home and record and put out that album, but not go out and tour, not promote it. I didn't want to live that life. I needed to be at home as a dad and raise my kids. So I consciously made a decision not to do that. And I sort of just stepped out of the music business. As I like to say, I love music, but I hate the music business, you know. And so I try to do things that I think are what I'm supposed to be doing, that's best for me and my family and my kids. And that period of my time, of my life, I really wanted to step out of the music business. And I made a conscious effort to do so. I did film scores, I did some acting and TV shows myself, anything that would keep me at home with my kids instead of going out on the road.
And heavy metal was a big hit.
Yeah, yeah. And there was a lot of push to get me out on the road, and I just said, no, I'm not going to do that. I won't do that. Been there, done that. I need to be a father. I need to raise my kids. Then, once they got old enough, and I wound up going through a divorce, and I was single, I regained my life and time to be able to write, record, play, put out Road to Forever. Now I'm in the process that I'm working to try to get a record out every 2 years.
Really?
It took me about 2 years of writing and recording in between being on tour. When I'm home, I have a studio at my home, a beautiful studio, and I spend a lot of time in that studio now, recording ideas, developing ideas, writing demos, singing into my iPhone as I'm driving down the 101, hoping I don't get busted by a cop for singing into the phone, But just constantly scribbling out ideas, little sketches, thumbnails, I like to call them, demos. Then later, when it comes time to sit down and really assess what would work, what I can breathe life into and turn into a full-fledged track and song, I've got a bunch of pieces to start from, as opposed to just walking into a studio and it's dark and nothing, no sound, no nothing, and going, well, what am I going to do? You know, those little moments of inspiration. It's much like having a dream and waking up from the dream and writing it down in the middle of the night. So when you go back to sleep, you wake up and go, what was that I dreamt last night? You go, oh, yeah, I remember that now. And if I don't do that, I did the same thing with Hotel California. I was just diddling around in this house in Malibu, and I came up with that progression. And I said, I have to go record a little bit of this. And I went back in my daughter's bedroom, who was 1 year old at the time, turned on this little TAC tape recorder with an acoustic guitar and just played that chord progression about 4 or 5 times, turned it off. And it was like just a little tidbit, a little piece or an idea. And so then when I came time to start writing, I went back and listened to 5 or 6 different things. And I said, okay, I'll finish this one, and I'll finish this one. And went and took a couple of things. I think I made about 16 demo track song ideas. I put them on a cassette. 2 of them wound up on the Hotel California record. One was Victim of Love, and the other one was Hotel California. And so that process of those moments of inspiration where you get an idea, and if I don't record it, the next day I can kind of remember what it was, but most of it's gone.
You always need to record it.
So I'm constantly doing that and snipping little pieces of stuff that I can save for later.
And it's amazing that you're still getting that type of inspiration, because, you know, you look at Billy Joel, stopped writing in 93, there hasn't been an Eagles record since 2007.
Yeah.
And yet you're still, you know, singing into your iPhone when you're driving, and still, you know, it's the sort of thing that you hear Keith Richards and Paul McCartney like woke up in the night with songs, and you're still, you've got a new lease of life creatively, it seems.
There's a song on this new album called Charmed. And it's about when you have all the trappings of success, fame, fortune, money, private jets, you know, a tin hanging on your arm, all this stuff. But if the passion's not in the music, it's all lost its charm. There's no satisfaction. There's no enthusiasm in life. It's just, you know, yeah, I got another new Ferrari. You become jaded. So the drive of doing all this has never been about the money for me. It's never been about the fame. It's always been about that passionate, lustful excitement of taking these little ideas and creating them, breathing life into them, and making them come alive. And then standing back at the end of the day and hitting play and going, that's fun, that's great, and me getting excited about it. So on one hand, it's a very selfish process to be inspired by your own ideas and then develop them. But then also there's another side of it. When you take those ideas and you fill them out, you put them out on a record, then you go out on stage and perform them, and people really react to them. They really enjoy them. I remember doing a show for the United Nations about 4 or 5 years ago. There were about 500 people that were heads of states and presidents from all over the world. Usually they sit around in the United Nations with these little ear cups on with translators telling them what's going on. But we were in the Waldorf Astoria in New York, and it was a performance for them. So I went out and played a couple of songs, and when I played Hotel California, everybody in the room was singing. I don't care what language, what country they were from, they knew that song. And it was an epiphany for me to realize that that one song had gone on to have literally worldwide impact to me. And until then, I thought, well, yeah, a lot of people know this song, but you know, you think it's just been on the radio in the United States, but indeed, it's become a worldwide impact from that one song. And so, when you see things like that as a result of your work, it's inspiring, and you want to keep doing it. You know, it makes people happy, and if I do what I do and it makes me happy and it makes other people happy, that's the best combination right there.
And why would you stop? I mean, Hotel California, I would say, is bigger than the name of the Eagles. It's sort of like, it's like a cultural treasure, really, isn't it? So, I mean, how does it feel to have you know, that the inception of that song came from that, you know, nylon string and that little part.
I think it's wonderful to be a classic, I guess is the best way to put it, you know. And to have done something while I was here that had such lasting legs on itself, you know, that different generations have heard it and appreciated it and liked it and enjoyed it. So, you know, one day I'm certain people will go, Hotel what? Is that Motel 6 you're singing about, or what is that? You know?
I don't think it will ever be forgotten. And do you ever get annoyed? So, you know, say you're driving around LA and Hotel California comes on the radio, because, you know, as a Brit, if you hear Hotel California on the radio in LA, you're like, we're here, this is LA. Do you get a bit annoyed?
No, I don't get annoyed. The one challenge I have is every time I play that song live, it's a very complicated guitar parts at the end that I wrote and recorded. And it's technically a challenge every night because everybody in the audience knows every word to that solo. If I miss one note, everybody's going to know. Yeah. So I have to be on my toes every night that I play that live. And so I'm constantly pushing myself up to that performance level, not only for that song, but for all the songs that I perform live. But it demands that you maintain a certain elegance in your playing and sophistication to be able to do that so that people really can see and appreciate what you brought in that song. So,
and in terms of, you know, rock and roll songs or rock songs with guitar harmonies like that, that's pretty innovative. Without Hotel California, there'd be no like Master of Puppets, or, you know, I wouldn't say. I mean, they must have been thinking, okay, let's do something a bit like Hotel California. Was that really, because obviously there's an initial idea that you came up with, but in the studio, was that kind of in the moment you decided, right, we're going to do this amazing like harmony thing, or did you?
What happened was I wrote that basic little acoustic guitar part that you hear at the very beginning of it, did some overdubs on it. I played bass on the demo. I wrote the bass line for it. I used a Rhythm Ace drum machine, like we were talking about earlier, that played sort of this reggae cha-cha beat, I guess you might call it. And I played the first 3/4 of the solo pretty much myself. Well, we got into the studio to record this. We actually had to record that song 3 times. The first time we recorded it was a great basic track, and when Don Henley went out to sing it, it was in the wrong key. Because I recorded it in the key of E minor, which is a great guitar key to play guitar in. Yeah. But when he went to sing it, and he had been singing it in his car in this kind of like Andy Gibb, Barry Gibb high falsetto voice, right? And so when he went out to sing it, it was like, you can't sing it like that. You have to sing it like you. So I went out with an acoustic guitar, sat in the studio, and figured out, okay, not E minor. How about D minor? Nope, that's still too high. C minor? Nope, that's still too high. A minor? Nope, that's too low. So we wound up playing it and recording it again, the key of B minor, which is not a friendly guitar part or guitar key to play in. It's just a little cumbersome, you know? Yeah. So anyway, we recorded it in that key, and then when we finally got down to Miami to do the guitar overdubs, I always thought that Joe and I would just sit together in the control room with 2 guitars, amps out in the studio with mics on them, run the track. I'd play a line, Joe would play a line, I'd play a line, and we'd have this kind of duel with each other, which we had done many times on stage in some of Joe's songs and stuff, and had a lot of fun doing it. That's why I wanted to do that at the end of that song. So we've been doing that for about 30 minutes, and Henley walks in and says, "What are you doing? That's not right." And I went, "What do you mean that's not right?" He said, "That's not like the demo. You have to play it just like you played on the demo." I said, "I don't remember what that was. That was a year ago." So I had to pick up the phone and call my housekeeper. We were in Miami. Call my housekeeper in Malibu, have her go through my studio and find this cassette, put it in a blaster on my kitchen, and play it and hold the phone up to the blaster So we could record in Miami the exact guitar solo that I just made up as a demo that Henley had been listening to for a year, so that I could learn what I wrote a year ago that it was a throwaway part as far as I was concerned. And then, so part of what I had written, I played, and part of what I had written, Joe played, to get up to the point where we could do that harmony stuff at the end. Joe finally said, we need to do something that goes like diddle 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 diddle. And I went, what do you mean diddle diddle? So he and I started going, and I figured out, knowing the progression, what I would play and what he would play and what I would play. And we literally recorded that harmony part bar or chord by bar or chord, and bar and chord and bar or chord, until we could.
How difficult it is to do live. That's how it had to be tracked.
That's right. And then finally we had time while the record was being mastered and the artwork was being done to, what did we do? How did we write this stuff? How are we going to do this live? And then I had the challenge, since I had played about 15 different guitar parts on that record. The reggae part, the acoustic 12-string, the solo parts, these harmony parts in the middle of the verses and stuff. How am I going to do that live? I can't play all these different acoustic guitars and stuff. So I sent somebody up to a guitar store and bought a double neck guitar. And when I was 14, I saw this guy, Chet Atkins, who had the first stereo guitar that I'd ever seen. And Chet had cut those pickups in half so that the low 3 strings went out of one output into one amp on one side of the stage, and the high 3 strings went out of another output jack to an amplifier on the other side of the stage. And he would play much like a ragtime piano player with his left hand on the low strings. He'd play boom, dig, boom, dig, doom, dig, doom, dig, doom. With his right hand, he'd play ba 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 ba, and he'd play the melody with his right hand. So he's had this speech. He said, the bloodiest war in America, where the most lives were lost, was the Civil War between the North and the South. And the North had this theme, dun 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 dun. He played that on the low strings, and the South had this song called Dixie. Da 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 da. And he says, in order to unify all this loss and all this tragedy, I'm going to play both of these at the same time. And he played both songs simultaneously, each one coming out of a stereo speaker on stage on the left and right. And I was just, oh my God. It was probably the coolest thing I'd ever seen a guitar player do in my life. Not only his technique, but the fact that it was wired stereo was just technologically, for its time, way in advance. So when I got this double neck guitar, I figured out that if I wired this guitar by drilling another hole in the top of it and having 2 outputs like I'd seen Chet Atkins do when I was a kid, that I could have one neck go out of one output and go into an Echoplex and into a Leslie. And when I flipped a switch that went down to the other neck, it would go out of a different output into a pedal board and into a deluxe that I would play this rock and roll stuff on. So I literally took 2 electric guitars and kind of glued them together so I could play those 2 parts simultaneously without having to literally change guitars in the middle of the song. So that guitar itself, that original guitar, is now hanging in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in Cleveland.
And is it going to be displayed in the Metropolitan Museum of Art?
That's right, yeah. I was getting there eventually. Yeah, I think at the Met, April 1st, they have an opening for I think it's called Play It Loud. It's supposed to be the most influential guitars in the history of rock and roll. That's what it is. That's Jimi Hendrix guitar, and Clapton, and Keith Richards, and Jimmy Page, and just all the people, Slash, all the people that have kind of gone through the decades, much like American rock and roll, but their guitars on exhibit as well. And I was honored and flattered that they asked me if it was okay if they took my guitar, that white double neck. It's been kind of beat up and worn and high miles on it, I guess you'd say, out of the Rock Hall and put it in that exhibit. So yeah, that's quite an honor for me to have that happen.
It's well deserved. And one has to say, the Eagles are thought of as a guitar, obviously a vocal harmony band, of course, and brilliant songs. But as a guitar band, and for people who haven't read your book, your nickname in the band was Fingers because of your guitar playing ability. So what I want to ask you is, Eagles, many people think of as the greatest American rock and roll band of all time. And as the lead guitarist in that band, what are some of the guitar moments that you're most proud of? Obviously, Hotel California, but what are some of the other things that you look back on in your sort of?
There's several things. I wanted to write a song that Joe and I could both play talk boxes on. I don't know if anybody knows other than Peter Frampton what a talk box is, or if you ever listen to Rocky Mountain Way, Joe plays it on. That's a great sound, and I'd played it and used it on some records as well, but I wanted to write a song that Joe and I could play that on. Now, my sense of phrasing melodically when I write solos is that of a horn player. I saw Miles Davis when I was 18 at the Village Gate in New York City. Band comes out, it's Tony Williams, Herbie Hancock, Ron Carter, and Wayne Shorter. They come out and they're just cooking, playing around. Miles walks up on the stage and he just stands there for about 3 minutes waiting. Everybody is waiting for his first notes. This band's just cooking along, da-da-da, and he plays 3 notes. Ba, 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 ba. And the choice and the time and the phrasing of those 3 notes meant more than all the Kenny G notes you could play in 10 minutes. And most horn players, they have a sense of phrasing. They can only play for so long before they have to take a pause, take a breath, and then play another phrase. And so that sense of phrasing comes from horns to me. Like the solo on One of These Nights is really, it should have been Dave Sanborn playing an alto sax. If you listen to that solo, it's really a sax solo that I played on guitar.
It's very melodic.
Yeah, and so my sense of phrasing as far as melody comes from the horn whirl. I think that's, I don't know if exactly who it was, but they said, if you want someone to learn something, set it to a very simple melody. If you think about little kids that are 18 months, 2 years old, they can learn the ABCs by a very simple song. Before they even know what an A and a B and a C look like, they can sing A, B, C, D, E, F, G, right? They learn that song. So there's a way to communicate to a part of the brain and in music that if it's simple enough, you can understand it. Can you sing me a Kenny G solo?
Probably not.
That's what I mean.
It'll take a while to learn.
Yeah. So my sense of phrasing goes back to a very simplistic style. And so when I approach any of that writing, like when I wanted to write the song for the long run with Joe and I playing talk boxes, I wrote this two harmony talk boxes that sounds like 2 muted trumpets playing. That was my concept, to use the talk boxes as like 2 muted trumpets. And so if you listen to it like that, you can hear 2 trumpets playing those harmonies together till we get to the solo, right? And then it's a talk box solo. And then it goes back playing these horn parts behind it. But the descending harmonies on Hotel California are very much like a horn section would play. You know, as a matter of fact, I did that not long ago for a charity, and we actually had a horn section with us that played those parts live, and it was like, I knew I wrote that for a horn section. That's perfect, you know. So it just seems like the more simple melodically you can be in your writing. So I would say that unique part of writing Those Shoes was a nice part for me. There's a section in the middle of Sad Cafe that I wanted to do a multi-track acoustic guitar harmony solo, which I'd never heard done. So I went out in the studio by myself and I started building this solo and then figuring out the harmonies that went on top of it. And I think there's like 6 different acoustic guitars playing this harmony part together.
And you tracked all of the parts.
Yeah, and it was just a unique way to have a section in a Eagles song that was unusual, different from, you know, typically what you'd normally hear on the radio. the parts that I wrote for New Kid in Town, those guitar parts behind that are kind of structured around the melody. I was saying earlier about working with Tom Petty's young band, the Epics, that they had two guitar players that would just flail artlessly. And I told one of them, don't play when Tom's singing. When he's not singing, you can play. And then when he starts singing, stop playing, because the vocals should really be prevalent, you know, the most prevalent thing. And so it's sort of that same way in putting ideas together like that, so that there's not a clutter of information coming at you. If you get too much information at the same time, your brain just can't process it, much less appreciate it. So to do those acoustic tracks like that in the middle of Sad Cafe, or Descending Lines in Hotel, or New Kid in Town, those sort of parts where the vocals aren't there, but there's a melody that's very reminiscent of what he's just sung, kind of in keeping. It fills a breath between the vocal and the next time the vocal enters. And so I think that's, for me, the way I've always looked at staying out of the way of the vocal and accompanying it at the same time. And
well, it's
so
the sign of a great player.
Yeah.
You know, because obviously you can do all the shredding stuff, but it's the melodic guitar players, Dave Gilmour, etc., who are even better than anybody who can do that.
Yeah.
And you know, that's certainly been a major contribution. And just before we finish, where can we see you next on the road? Because you've been playing solo shows to massive audiences. I've seen all over social media and YouTube and stuff, and it's sounding great. So you must be having a blast doing that.
I love to play live. You know, like I said, the excitement of working in the studio is great, because it's a very creative release to do that. But it's the difference in somebody that's working on a film on a sound stage that gets to take 15, take 16, let's fix the flag on this light up here, and let's move this camera another foot. Okay, take that again, 18, 19, 20, versus someone that's doing a live performance on Broadway. When you walk out on a live stage, you don't get but one chance at selling yourself to those people, convincing them of what you're there for, and having them enjoy it and give you back. And that there's a symbiotic relationships in a live audience that doesn't exist in a studio. And so both sides of the world of music, to me, the creative side of it, writing and recording, and the live performance, have to go together to me. And the artists that I respect the most are the artists that have all three talents. They can sing, they write, and they play their own music. They're great singers, they're great writers, they're great musicians, but to get all three talents in one package at a really high level is unusual. So I've been working on all three of my aspects of writing, singing, and playing for a while now to kind of get it up to snuff. And so I'm just enjoying it. Love playing live, and love working in the studio.
Awesome. Well, yeah, can't wait to hear the new record, and can't wait to see the show. So thanks very much, Don.